to help you to loosen this wound up. Okay, so what's the next one then? The next wound is abandonment. Now, this wound can come about for many, many reasons. So, yes, you can actually have been abandoned as a child in a very sort of actual way, but this abandonment doesn't always mean that they were not there. Maybe there was an emotional abandonment because they could have been physically present, but there was maybe a lack of connection, no depth in that connection, no closeness, that kind of thing, and that you didn't really feel like your parents were really there for you, your caregivers were there for you. It also can come about when a parent or a main caregiver dies. And I know that I experienced this when my mum died when I was an adult. And so, she didn't deliberately die to abandon me, but the feeling of abandonment was still there, like, you've left me, what am I meant to do now without you, kind of thing. And this can really foster a really deep feeling of loneliness, of really just being left alone. And kind of like to deal with the world on your own. This kind of loneliness, aloneness can really be a strong thing for you, which can lead to being overly dependent on others because you're desperately trying to not be alone. So it might be that you're very emotionally dependent on your partners or your friends, and they might experience that as a little bit suffocating potentially, because you're like this because you just feel like you just can't cope on your own, or you're not going to be able to manage on your own. Now, this abandonment wound can also lead to some fears like a fear of rejection or a fear of loneliness. So when you have this fear of rejection going on, or a fear of loneliness, it means that you will probably end up trying to do anything to prevent being abandoned again. And so this might mean, weirdly, that you end up being the one that does the abandoning or the rejecting, because then at least you get in there first, because then at least they won't abandon you. You can get in there and then know that you're going to be, and you know that you're going to be okay because you're not the one being abandoned. Because it's this feeling of them abandoning you, which is the real hurtful aspect of this wound. But this also can show up in other ways in terms of projects and creative endeavors, or in your work life, where you might not stick with something until completion. You might kind of abandon the project, and so it means that you have things that you try and do that just don't get done. They just, you're great at starting and not so great at finishing. Hi, I've got that one. I've got the t-shirt. So people with fears of abandonment might think things like, I'll leave you before you leave me. Nobody supports me, and so I'm not therefore prepared to support anybody else. And if you leave me, you won't come back. This sort of dramatic sense about it all. So how does this wound show up? So I've talked about some of these already, but the smothering of others, because you need to be looked after and not abandoned. So that can kind of feel quite smothering from their perspective. This dependency on other people. And so maybe you therefore become a bit of a burden on them, or maybe there's a fear of being a burden. So this burden energy kind of isn't too far away from you, whether or not you're aware of it or not. You might have a fear of it, but there's definitely this kind of burdensome energy not far from you. This fear of loneliness might kind of get in the way of you really sort of acting well independently, because you foster this dependence on others. Being independent and living on your own, or working independently, operating independently, can be a bit of a challenge for you. This might mean also this loneliness, this fear of loneliness might mean that you end up sort of spending a lot of time crying on your own and feeling overwhelmed by loneliness. Even though you might not actually be lonely, the feeling of it could be quite overwhelming. There is a tendency with this wound to have a bit of a victim mindset. So that means that you see yourself as the victim of the world. So, oh my God, I've got such bad luck. The universe is out to get me. Things happen to me. It's not my fault. Oh, this thing has gone wrong again. Woe is me. Oh my God, I'm just getting on the bad end of everything. This sense of you're not in control of what's happening in your life. it's happening to you. You know, that's really how sort of the victim thing kind of shows up, really, that things aren't your fault. And that means that you're not really taking responsibility for your life, but that I'm going to talk about that in a bit. Another aspect is where you might dial up your suffering a little bit just to attract that attention, because it's, again, this kind of, it's a way of bringing people in and close. And, you know, if you're not well, then people aren't going to leave you unwell. They're going to come and see you. They're going to check you're okay. So you might kind of make it sound a little bit worse than it is, just to kind of bring people close. A lot of people that have this wound end up sort of suffering a lot more than they need to on the physical, on this kind of front, because the mind is a powerful thing. The minute you kind of tell yourself that actually you're suffering a lot more, and your aches and pains or whatever it is you're experiencing are worse than maybe they are, that then your body kind of goes, oh, they're worse than that. Okay, well, I'll dial this up then. And then before you know it, you are suffering more than that. So it's a very catch-22 situation if you're not careful and you don't kind of spot it happening. You are susceptible to celebrity behavior. And so what I mean by this is this constant talking of self, maybe this, you know, the Instagram kind of vibe of, oh, I'm doing this now and look at me doing this and you know, like, do we all care? Maybe not, but a sense that everybody else does care. There are problems with this wound around making decisions. And again, this is the acting independently thing, where, you know, when you are truly independent, you kind of have to think through those decisions for yourself, because you're thinking through things for you. But when you are dependent on others, that makes it really hard to make a decision, because you've got to consider them, and then, well, what do they want? And this just makes decisions just tricky territory. Okay, so this is why working, you know, independence is a strong theme in terms of the head trash clearances I'm going to talk later on. What else have I got on my list? Yeah, you resist the advice of others. Your moods can be quite changeable, and this is this kind of this ebb and flow of these feelings of loneliness, and as you come and go with other people, it kind of, because you are dependent on others, then you don't have your own, not energy source, but this sense of, I can look after myself, and therefore I can keep myself in a solid, stable emotional place. Your emotions, your sense of well-being is very dependent on others, and if they're there or not, then that can really affect how you are. So that can really show up as a sort of up and down emotional journey. Whereas if you're kind of, you have a strong sense of yourself and that independence and that foundation in you, then you're less susceptible to what's going on outside, which can give you a much stronger emotional foundation. You've got problems ending relationships because you do need to have somebody there for you. So you might be one of those people that is in a very long relationship, and it might not be the best one for you because you simply can't be the one to end it, even though it might be really bad for you. Hi, I've got this one. Yes, I was in one of these relationships and where it had to get so bad. Like, it was like, Lex, you cannot possibly carry on in this relationship because this is ridiculous behavior that you're tolerating. You've got to get out now. There's no excuse. You've got to get out. And then when I came out of that, I was a total mess. I mean, it was, you know, so this idea that you're in this, you know, ending relationships unless there's a really kind of, oh, well, I don't want to go into that, but I'm sure you get the idea. There's also a lot of use of guilt here, where there is this sense of, you know, you owe me because I did that for you, and now you need to be there for me. So you need to do this thing for me too. You know, this kind of, you know, again, this is creating this very strong connection, this dependence that you're kind of locking people in with this, you know, into you to stop them from going away, right? This is how this fear manifests, means you can end up sort of manipulating to that level, and you might not realize to the degree to which you're doing this. What else? That's it on my list of how it shows up. Now, let's talk about the head trash clearances then. So I've mentioned independence and dependence. So again, that's a very, very strong theme. But obviously, we've got to like look at loneliness, being alone, being on your own, those kind of themes. Abandoned, being rejected, rejection. Being a victim, that can be a good clearance as well. Making decisions or being decisive, that kind of thing. Sadness. you know, when we're overwhelmed with these kind of strong feelings of sadness, sometimes that excess sadness energy, we just need to kind of let all of that go, and just sort of give ourselves a little bit of an emotional break. And also, being a burden might also be a good clearance to do to help loosen this wound a little bit.